So what is the actual point of a human life? How do we literally achieve our highest good? Today, we're tackling those massive questions by diving into one of the absolute most foundational texts in all of Western philosophy, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle starts things off with this brilliant, super practical analogy. He says, think about it like this. If we want to live a good life, we're basically like archers who need a specific mark to aim at. I mean, if we don't even know what the target is, how could we ever expect to hit it? In this explainer, we're going to clearly map out the structural and philosophical architecture of this magnificent treatise, and we'll trace the journey of the human soul from our most basic everyday habits all the way up to its divine peak.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our journey through Aristotle's masterpiece is going to unfold in 4 acts. First, hierarchies of the good. Second, justice and mental excellence. Third, strength of will and bonds. And finally, the absolute summit, the divine telos.
Act 1. Hierarchies of the good. Now, Aristotle's foundational premise here is highly teleological. If you're not familiar, telos just means end, goal, or purpose. He argues that literally every single art, science, and human action aims at some sort of good. The shipbuilder aims at a vessel, the military arts aim at victory, but those are just subordinate arts. There absolutely has to be one supreme end, a chief good, that we desire entirely for its own sake. Because if there isn't, our desires would just go on endlessly and be totally empty.
So what exactly is that chief good? Well, Aristotle calls it eudaimonia. Now, we usually see eudaimonia translated as happiness, but honestly, that's kind of misleading. It is absolutely not some passive mood, a fleeting feeling, or just kicking back and feeling content. For Aristotle, eudaimonia is an energeia, an active working. It's the active fulfillment of the human function, or ergon, in accordance with reason, sustained over an entire complete life. He actually gives us a wonderful analogy here to make it click. Think about the Olympic Games. The crowns of victory don't just go to the best-looking or the strongest people sitting in the crowd, right? No way. The crowns go to the athletes who actually step into the arena and compete. The prize of life is won only by those who act, and who act well.
And this active working builds into a very precise architecture of habit. You see, we aren't just born virtuous. We don't naturally possess moral excellence straight out of the gate. Instead, we have to forge it through a process called ithymos, or habituation. It's basically a 3-step process. First, we take deliberate action. Second, by repeatedly performing those specific actions, we undergo habituation. We actually become just by doing just deeds. We become brave by acting bravely, right in the face of fear. And finally, all that repetition solidifies into a hyksis, a permanent, highly stable disposition or state of character. It literally becomes our second nature.
Which brilliantly illustrates Aristotle's wildly famous doctrine of the mean. Virtue isn't just some random good deed, it is a deliberate choice, a proeresis, that rests perfectly right between 2 incredibly destructive extremes, the vice of defect and the vice of excess. Think about it. If you flee from absolutely everything, you suffer the defect of cowardice. But if you fear literally nothing and just rush blindly into danger, you suffer the excess of rashness. But if you stand firm, calculating the exact right amount of fear and confidence for the situation, boom, you achieve the virtue of courage. Virtue is that exact intermediate sweet spot relative to us, determined by reason.
Act 2. Justice and mental excellence. So now we are shifting from our individual habits over to how our character actually operates within the wider civic community and within the rational mind itself.
At the absolute pinnacle of moral character, Aristotle introduces a concept he calls the great-souled man, or megalopsychos. This specific virtue is basically the crowning ornament of all the other moral virtues. The great-souled man is someone of immense, genuine worth who justly and accurately estimates his own high value. He seeks out great honors, sure, but only those given by good men, and he accepts them moderately because he knows he truly deserves them. On the complete opposite extreme, you've got the vain man, who vastly overestimates his own worth without actually possessing the foundational virtues to back it up.
Now, those moral virtues ultimately have to translate into societal harmony, which brings us to civic justice, or dikaiosune. This is the complete exercise of virtue toward your neighbor in the political community, the polis. Aristotle actually splits this into 2 distinct models. First up is distributive justice, which deals with dividing common wealth or honors. This one is proportional. It's entirely based on merit. You basically get out what you put in. The second model is corrective justice, and this is strictly arithmetical. If someone steals from or injures another person, the law treats both parties as equals and seeks to rectify the exact mathematical imbalance caused by the injury. It takes the gain right away from the offender to restore the victim.
But to actually hit that perfect mean of virtue and successfully execute justice, our rational soul needs some very specific tools. Aristotle distinguishes between two main intellectual virtues. On one hand, we have theoretical wisdom, or Sophia. This apprehends the eternal, unchanging laws of the universe, the stuff that literally cannot be otherwise. But human life is messy. It is constantly changing. And that is exactly why we need practical wisdom, or phronesis. Phronesis is our master cognitive guide. It's essentially the eye of the soul that calculates the exact right means to achieve our moral ends in unpredictable, everyday human situations. Long story short, you cannot be truly good without phronesis. Act 3. Strength of will and bonds. Because let's be real, even with a firm grasp of practical wisdom, Aristotle knows humans are incredibly complicated. We face intense internal psychological conflicts, and we have to navigate extremely complex external relationships.
This brings us to a highly relatable dilemma, the problem of will. Now, Socrates famously argued that if a man truly knows what is good, he will just automatically do it. Nobody does wrong willingly. But Aristotle looks at actual human experience and says, wait a minute, that is just not true. We all know exactly what it's like to know the right rule, to know exactly what we should do, and yet completely fail to do it. It's like a brutal internal tug of war where our passions are just waging war against our rational premises.
Aristotle dissects this failure of moral strength using two key concepts. First is akrasia, or incontinence. The acratic person actually has the right knowledge and the right rule in their head, but their will is entirely overmastered by the sheer force of bodily desire or passion. Their moral vision gets temporarily clouded, leading them to do the wrong act. Pitted against this is ankrateia, or continence. The continent person experiences those exact same fierce, unruly passions, but they actually possess the strength of will to actively master them, allowing reason to successfully prevail.
So the crucial point is how navigating these internal desires also dictates how we relate to others, leading to Aristotle's anatomy of friendship, or philia. He basically organizes it into 3 tiers. At the base, we've got friendships of utility. You associate with someone simply because it's mutually beneficial. Next up are friendships of pleasure. You hang out because you share a specific enjoyment, like playing a sport or just laughing together. But both of those are pretty fragile, right? They dissolve the second the utility or the pleasure fades away. The ultimate tier, though, is the friendship of virtue, or telia philia. This is that rare, incredibly enduring bond between inherently good people who wish well for the other person strictly for that person's own sake. In this kind of bond, a friend literally becomes a second self.
Act 4. The divine telos. Here, we transition away from the kinetic movement, the busy civic life, and the struggles of the previous books, and step into the serene stasis of ultimate human fulfillment.
First things first, Aristotle has to completely reframe true pleasure. The Epicureans back then thought pleasure was the ultimate goal of life. Aristotle totally disagrees. He explains that pleasure is not the target you aim at. Rather, it's the natural concomitant, the index that completes a perfect activity. Think of it like the natural bloom of health that accompanies youth. Pleasure intensifies and perfects an activity when a subject at its best acts upon an object at its best. Therefore, the absolute highest and best pleasures are naturally going to accompany the highest and best activities. So what on earth is that highest human activity? Well, Aristotle makes his boldest claim yet. The supreme form of eudaimonia is not found in practical politics, or business, or warfare. It is theoria, the contemplative life. This is the pure activity of the highest element within us, the intellect, directed straight at the highest eternal objects of the universe. While our moral virtues are strictly human, this capacity for deep philosophical contemplation is actually our way of partaking in the divine.
Just let this quote really sink in for a second. Aristotle writes, "The working of the intellect, being apt for contemplation, is thought to excel in earnestness, and to aim at no end beyond itself." This self-sufficient, unwearied contemplation is the absolute peak. It is a state of being where you aren't doing something just to get something else down the line. The sheer, pure act of understanding truth is the complete and final end. It is the closest we, as mortal beings, can ever possibly get to touching the divine telos.
But hey, Aristotle is definitely a realist. He knows we can't all just spend all day in divine contemplation. We need food, we need safety, and we need a functioning society. Which leaves us with a brilliant, provocative question.
one that bridges this text directly into his next massive work, the Politics. If contemplation is the ultimate human end, how must we structure our laws, our education, and our politics to ensure every single citizen actually have the chance to achieve it? It's a question that really demands we look closely at our own habits and the society we are actively building today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer of the Nicomachean Ethics, and keep aiming for that highest good.